Greetings, Jamaica. Today I want to speak to you about some important issues of governance that are topical at the present time and that I'm finding troubling. There's a whole question of the bureaucracy and the integrity of Jamaica's civil service. Now, the position of permanent secretary is the senior position in the civil service in any ministry. It is a permanent post for the career of that person, that officer who's appointed. That's why it's called permanent secretary. That person runs the ministry from an administrative perspective, from government to government, whichever party forms the government. So it's very important, and it is the tradition and the convention in our system that permanent secretaries are independent, non-partisan, non-political, above reproach. Now, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Energy, Telecommunications and Transport retired effective December last year. And a new person has been appointed as the permanent secretary. That person is Khadija Campbell Rochester. Now, Mrs. Campbell Rochester formerly was in charge at the Constituency Development Fund unit within the Office of the Prime Minister. But she is somebody who has had a close association with an MP. In fact, the MP is Andrew Holness, Prime Minister. She was the director of his NGO, his non-profit, Positive Jamaica Foundation, which was called up in the Integrity Commission report on his affairs. She was also, I believe, a director of the West Central St. Andrew Trust, another NGO that he has in relation to his constituency. How can it be right that somebody that is so closely involved in the governance of the arrangements, or was so closely involved in the governance of the arrangements for somebody's constituency, being appointed a permanent secretary in the civil service? It doesn't look right to me, and I'm bringing it to your attention. Of course, there's the broader question of the wife of the head of government, the wife of the prime minister, being appointed the umpire of the affairs of parliament, the legislature, as Speaker of the House. Again, how can that be right? The tradition in our system of government is that the Speaker is an independent person. Even if they come from one side or the other, they are supposed to act impartially and independently to ensure even-handedness and fairness in the conduct of parliamentary affairs. How can it be right that the wife of the head of government, the Prime Minister's wife, is the umpire in Parliament in the form of the Speaker? We objected to this strongly when the decision was announced that she was going to be reappointed Speaker after the last election. Despite our objections, the appointment went ahead. Again, it doesn't look right. It isn't really consistent with the way in which the Westminster system of democracy, which is what we adhere to, ought to function. The last point I want to address is this JPS $150 million loan. Now, all of us, want to see electricity restored to all Jamaicans as quickly as possible after Melissa. And I express my sympathies for anyone who is still without electricity. We had raised the question, though, because the minister came to Parliament in December and said that the funding required to restore the grid was $350 million at least. And yet the amount of money that the government was going to provide was $150 million. Now, remember, the government's a 20% shareholder in JPS. The other 80% is owned by two overseas companies, Marubeni of Japan, East West Power of South Korea. They weren't putting any money up for the restoration because the minister had given a notice earlier in 2025 saying that their license was coming to an end and wouldn't be renewed in 2027. So they didn't have any security that they would still be in charge of Jamaica's electricity grid come 2027, and they weren't going to put up any money without any security. So the government was putting up money far beyond its 20%. But still, at least $200 million less than the minister told us was needed to fix the grid. We asked him, how is it a good idea to put some funding in without knowing how the necessary amount would be reached and obtained? He never answered that question. I asked him again on Tuesday. Again, he dodged the question. And I'm saying, a matter as fundamental as this, where the government's resources, which is really the proceeds of the catastrophe bond, 150 million, has been lent to company JPS that Jamaica owns 20% of, in a scenario where we're told that the necessary resources to do the job is 350 million, so it's not even half of what's required. How is it a good idea to proceed without explaining how you're going to finance the full restoration project? Who is not going to have their light restored because the money can't stretch to what is needed? These questions have never been answered, despite how important this issue is to Jamaica at this time. Again, not good governance, people. We need to be vigilant. We need to stay on our toes because things are going in a direction that suggests that we have concerns that we must be vigilant about. Over to you.